Thank you for being here today. This is a great conversation we're going to be having, spilling a little bit of tea on what it's like to be women, diverse women in tech, especially in AI. So I've been excited for this conversation so we can get right to it. So you're in this new chapter in your entrepreneurial journey as a founder of ChatBlackGpt. How have you experienced racism during this chapter?
Yes, so racism in general is something that you can experience consciously, subconsciously, but specifically when it comes to my company, I get a lot of jokes. So, for example, just last week, somebody had made a joke about ChatBlackGPT taking rapper to a whole new level with pictures of blackface Putin and blackface Elon Musk, and people just think it's a joke and don't take it serious. And racism is just something you can expect, and it's why I am so focused on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And your journey didn't happen overnight. It's been a 10-year, even though the more recent chapter is what I like to say, going with that energetic flow, but you have a 10-year history of arriving to this space. What's your origin story, and how has that catalyzed what you're doing now with your company?
Yeah, so I've always had an independent spirit when it comes to wanting to do business and be independent of any kind of corporate environment. And when you have a business like photography or a business where you're doing coaching, it's hard to keep going sometimes. And you gauge your success comparing yourself to others, and you may become uninspired at times. So over the years, I've learned what it was that stopped me. And it took a while, but I was able to go around those pieces and say, okay, this is what stopped me last time. I'm not gonna cut corners or get something, not exactly what I want. So that's how I was actually I'm gonna go for it, and no negotiating, this is how I'm gonna move forward.
Yeah. And bias is a big thing. It's a big topic that everyone is talking about, right? Bias and the topic of diversity and emerging tech and AI. How do you feel? But the bias part is really a big obstacle for a lot of these companies. How do you feel these companies could be doing a better job at peeling back those layers of bias? Because as humans, we all have some level of bias, so naturally, and then we can add on to that discussion. But how do you think people could be doing a better job in companies to peel back those layers?
Sure. I think collaborating with small businesses like mine or new startups that are focused on cultural development and technology, and kind of seeing what pain points we're addressing, why people are attracted to it, what is it that they feel is missing as well, and take some of those insights into consideration when they're doing their design. So it's to say okay, why do people care about ChatBlackGPT? What are people paying attention to me for? And taking that back to their teams and saying hey, we should collaborate. Maybe we should see about developing more nuance into our AI that people can tap into when they, have certain queries. So I think that's one way.
Yeah. And have you had thoughts as to why they haven't, why they haven't been more inclusive about bringing that in?
Sure. I think traditionally tech has been a tough environment to integrate a lot of diversity into for multiple different factors, whether that be long-standing systemic issues or opportunities in certain areas to get certain kinds of education. But I think that it also is a matter of you don't know how to fix what you can't see. So it's hard to say, hey, we're going to focus on fixing, this offensive thing that happens, because they're not offended by it. So it's almost what are they going to do unless they have more opinion in that area, right? So I mean, it's hard to place the blame, but obviously there's things we can do that need to be done.
And sometimes it's stating the obvious.
That's true.
It's going back to the basics and reminding them of that. And how do you feel? Because you're on a specific mission, and your roots are firmly planted on what that big vision is. How do you feel AI and emerging tech in general can help to like bridge those gaps for marginalized communities and also create social impact and social justice as well?
Yeah, so the overarching goal in ChatBlackGpt is to get marginalized people and communities to have a safe space to interact with the technology, to start building and benefiting from AI. If you're reading headlines that are saying racist data is in AI and it's biased and it's harmful, and then you have headlines that are saying AI is the best thing since the internet, it's so amazing, there can be some discouragement and deterring from embracing the technology that I don't think is fair. So with ChatBlackGpt, there's an opportunity to inject that representation and make the experience more relatable for a different kind of community. And it does that through prioritizing different data sources that are more reflective of our lived experience in the Black community.
Beautiful. And we know that AI and emerging tech lacks, it's sort of its own closed network. It lacks diversity. Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot of women and cross-generational like lived experiences in there. And then there's the other side of it too, where there's criticism if you're not a full-on fledged like technical founder, and people criticizing maybe like customizable GPTs or the different ways to get a vision out there. What are your thoughts on, or what advice would you give someone who's sitting on the sidelines right now that has this vision, wants to leverage the tech, may not be technical, and are being kind of held back because of imposter syndrome to be like, well, I'm not technical, what do I know? Why me, basically? What would you tell them?
Sure. So in the spirit of capitalism, I think a lot of corporate America, they want to make things cheaper to do. And in order to do that, they're going to have to automate things. And sometimes that includes technical jobs, now that we have this kind of technology being embraced across the landscape. And with that kind of development full speed ahead, it's no longer a requirement to have those kind of coding skills. So even the people who have studied it for years are irrelevant, but aren't held as such a prestige that it's almost like you can't do this because you didn't go, to Ivy League to learn it. But people who did go to Ivy League built systems so that anyone could learn it and use it. And that's what matters. So having the confidence to embrace it and forget about who, cares if you can type in the code versus go into a library and plug and play and split things. Like, it doesn't matter. If there is something productive and useful that you're building that matters to you and your community, do that in whatever way you can. And you don't have to do it alone. Not everybody can go back in time and get a doctorate in AI or linguists, nobody can go back in time and do all that. So you have to collaborate with people who are experts in their field. And there's nothing to be ashamed of asking for help building a technology, especially for social impact. So I wouldn't worry about it at all.
Beautiful. Thank you. I always like to say that even with all the tech that exists in the world today, we're still very much human.
Yeah.
So what has the power of storytelling, which you do an amazing job with, what has it taught you in regards to value creation and the importance of storytelling to build a movement, to build community around a brand or around a movement towards something, some level of impact?
Sure. So my journey in particular has always been untraditional. Even when I worked at those companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Meta, I started out contracting. I didn't go and apply full time and have all of these credentials. I started out in 3-month contracts, did really well, got extended to 6 months, 9 months to a year, used that experience to go into another company, and then I converted full time, and that was my journey, very untraditional. So coming to storytelling, I'm more interested in helping bring others along. I don't want to just pop up out of nowhere with $1 million grant and be like, wow, look at this cool new AI. No, I want to tell you how I use storytelling to get here today, right? So maybe Tribaja, Diversitech wouldn't have heard of me if I wasn't sharing my journey. Here's how I learned what AI is. Here's how I learned how to fill the gaps. And here's how I learned how to get people to understand that they have capabilities in this space as well. So sharing your journey is super important, and the most valuable thing you have is what you don't know, because you can always share how you learned it, and that's very good for storytelling.
Yeah, and I think it's the way since ancient times, it's been the way that we all come together is through the power of the heart and storytelling. You mentioned the big companies that you worked with, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft. What are some like takeaways, like some good takeaways that you've been able to like leverage in your journey with now being a founder? And then as a follow-up question, what are some of the things that weren't necessarily bad, but more of where you saw an opportunity or a gap that could be filled when you became a leader and created your own company?
Sure. So one thing I learned about working at these companies is to have a higher standard for myself in general. Like, I had never gone to an offsite before I was full-time at Meta, and I just remembered how special I felt getting my plane tickets paid for, hotel paid for, you got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so when I had the opportunity to do that for my team, I did that because I wanted them to feel how I felt, empowered and special and a big part of something that is going to change a lot. And so that higher standard of operating is something that I'm going to carry with me throughout my entire journey as an entrepreneur and a founder, as well as the work ethic. Pretty much I love the details. I'm very research oriented. My job had allowed me to do all of that. And I love that I could transfer those skills into my own. You just have to remember your talents don't live and die with the company you work at. You are what is valuable to the company. You bring that value, and they don't get to decide whether or not you are a program manager or a product manager. You don't have to ask permission. Just because you are or aren't getting paid to do something doesn't mean that is or is not what you are, who you are. So I learned how to embrace my truth, and I'm a Black woman in technology, like, period. I'm not going to let anybody decide that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously you never want to speak down on any place you've worked. Rehire eligibility is very important. And of course, when you're an entrepreneur, you may want to go forward and have partnerships. You may want to leverage some of their grants, networks, facilities. And when you're in good standing, that's really powerful. And so when I can say some not so great things, that was more of me feeling lonely and isolated. And it's not that these spaces don't make an effort to accommodate. It's more, how am I processing? How am I looking into ways that I can build my confidence? And sometimes that can perpetuate trauma, especially when you're in a workplace where people are giving you microaggressions or saying it's your tone, it's your delivery, maybe you could just, that is hard to hear. And building that resilience and having that self-reflection, it's a hard process to go through, but it also builds your character, and then you can create technology that helps others circumvent it.
Yeah.
And just, thrive on their own.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it all. It's in a way you find other opportunities to support based on your own lived experience, which is never a bad thing. I love this. You wrote this on LinkedIn, and I loved it. And it's a big thing for like founders, whether they're going into AI or emerging tech or Web3. It's the funding conversation, and we know what the probability and stats are for that, especially women of color. It's less than 2% will ever see the light of day of any sort of VC funding, but we know that's just a probability and stat. There's always an expansive place to create from. But you wrote this on LinkedIn, and I loved it. There is an illusion that money makes you move faster in a startup. If you don't know what your business needs, it can actually slow you down. And I know you went on to say, if you get $100,000, you just block the bigger vision because you're working off of that one number, and the vision probably supports something largely bigger than that. So can you tell us like how your own personal journey, because I know you've been determined to do it a different way to show people, how has that shifted your thoughts on, creating value and income, and how you're inviting other entrepreneurs to look at it, the landscape a little bit differently?
Sure. So having a startup, one thing that you can take into consideration is that you don't have to wait for money. Like getting an investment or an angel investor or a grant or VC money isn't what makes you not or a founder or an entrepreneur. You are that regardless. And when it comes to like getting funds and supporting that journey, I personally started with my severance once I got laid off, but obviously that money runs out, so how did I continue? I created my own value with storytelling. Like if you want to know how to build a custom GPT, if you want to understand why cultural relevance in AI is important, I can show you those things. That's me creating value for others that I didn't ask anybody, like, can I do this? I just did that, and then other people found value in it. And so that all starts with storytelling and embracing your truth and being vulnerable. Conversations with an angel, like an angel is somebody who has their own money and their own wealth, and what they do is they say, hey, I'm going to give you this money, obviously I want it back, but they're a lot more flexible with their terms. And they say, it may or may not work out, they're kind of okay, or they'll let you have 10 years to pay them back. So angels are more flexible, and conversation with venture capital, VC, looks more like, well, how are you going to monetize? How are you going to make money? What does this look like in 5 years, 10 years? What's the differentiator? I actually find value in both conversations, but instead of looking for money, I actually seek the roadmap to your wallet. I want to know what I need to tell you today to make you sign $1 million check. And I ask them that. And they tell me, like, okay, well, I need to see these validation points, and I want to know if your pilot partners will pay to work with you. And I'd rather take all of that and go deliver value to people who wouldn't otherwise be in those rooms than just take money that I know is going to come and go. And also in those conversations, talking to a VC and being asked constantly, how are you going to make money? But how do you monetize? I'm like, but how am I helping people actually thrive and use AI? And it just tied me even closer to the mission of ChatBlackGpt. And then I just created other business divisions that are VC eligible and make sense for that, but not the core of ChatBlackGpt. So kind of just rerouted me and also reinforced that you can create your own value to create money opportunities.
Yeah, and you can reverse engineer where to go next when you're ready to, when you decide you're ready to get that funding down the road, if that point ever comes, because there's some companies that are multi-million-dollar companies that have never taken any funding. So there's definitely more than one way to do it. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll start wrapping it up with two questions. Two last questions. There was one full circle moment I witnessed on your LinkedIn page when I found out we were going to be doing this session, and it made me cry because it was so beautiful about life and humanity, which was it was John Hope Bryant's keynote session. So you had one session that you had attended, and he said some words to you, and maybe you could tell the room what they were, that catalyzed a full circle moment where I saw the second video, which is when you're showing up and saying what those words did for you and where you were in a short period of time. So maybe tell our audience what that was, and then if anybody is in the room hesitating, thinking they're not enough, that they can't do it, it's a big mountain, what kind of gems would you want to leave them with before they leave us here today?
Sure. So I was recently laid off at that point. I took some time off to recover, invested in my mental health, went to therapy, took some time away from the job market in general. I was ideating on where I wanted to move forward in entrepreneurship. And when I was ready, I started to attend some conferences. And I went to a conference in Atlanta, which was the Forbes BLK inaugural summit. So at that summit, it's a little bit more intimate, like this space here, and you can actually talk to the people that were keynoting, and John Hope Bryant was one of them. So I got in line, I didn't have anything quite to say, But I said to him, you know, I just got laid off. My name is Erin. And I kind of noticed that when something traumatizing happens, it can almost become your like auto, like I got laid off, I got laid off. And I kind of even in that moment gave myself the ick. But he interrupted me and he said, I see success in your eyes. And the way he said it to me just kind of was like, I don't care that you got laid off. I don't want to hear that. I know you're going to succeed. And that resonated with me. And I took that energy with me when I went home and started to develop further on solving some of these issues for bias in AI. What can I do? How can I contribute? Okay, well, we need some more culture in it. We need representation. ChatBlackGpt. And that's how it went. And then you get it trademarked. You start telling your story, people are coming in, hey, I want to support. Now I have an engineering CTO from Carnegie Mellon, and then he's bringing in a team, and then I have doctorates in behavioral science, social science, prevention science, like social justice historian. I have a team of 15 people who are all very connected to the mission, and it starts with being vulnerable. So when I had saw him again, it was from being invited to the International Leadership Summit by TD Jake's executive team. And I was actually going to sit in the back, and somebody was like, you should sit here. And I'm like, they said, sit here. And I sat there, and I just happened to be right next to the guy with the mic when John Hope Bryant said he had time for just 2 questions. And I went up there, and I asked him, what can you share with everyone tonight that's going to help them feel as inspired as I did when he told me I had success in my eyes that day? And then he shared, and it was a beautiful full circle moment. So I'm glad that it resonated with you, because that's what I want to display. There's value in that, vulnerability in those moments.
Yeah, and you just never know who's in the room and who needs to hear that just one word of inspiration, and you plant that seed. Well, thank you for spending time this afternoon with all of us, and I'm super excited to see where your journey continues to go. I know you have a big vision, and I can't wait to see it continue to manifest into form, because it's already here.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.